Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud, Daf 10 of Sheqalim. The Daf begins with discussing our Mishnah from yesterday. We saw a machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi about the people who guard the aftergrowths of Shemitah so that there will be grain for the Omer and Shtei Alechem. According to Rabbi Yossi, he has no problem if people want to volunteer for this position. According to the Chachamim, the people have to be paid. We're going to discuss that machlokas between them, and then we get a bit into the Omer and a bit of Shemitah, and then we get onto a new Mishnah at the top of Yud Amud Beis. So going back to this machlokas from yesterday in the Mishnah, so the sort of dispute between the Gemara wants to sort of phrase and position the machlokas between them as relates to how the relationship between private property and communal offerings. Whereas Rabbi Yossi, right, because the concern is that if you have a fellow, so it's Shemitah, right? And the concern is that we're not going to have new grain to be able to take the Omer and the Shtei Alechem. So what do? So we have somebody guard the grain. Now the way that we wanted to explain it was that we're not actually guarding and like putting up a fence around the grain because it's hefker, it's Shemitah. So you have somebody who kind of keeps an eye on the grain and make sure no animals eat it, or if anybody wants to kind of chop it, they request that maybe they don't, so that there will be wheat and barley for the Omer and Shtei Alechem. So now the concern is that if these people are not getting paid for their work, well then if they kind of take this stuff, well then it'll belong to them, and then the question is, once it belongs to them, can they then donate it to the Beis HaMikdash to be used for the Omer and Shtei Alechem, because it will be private property? Can somebody donate private property to the Beis HaMikdash to be used for communal offerings? That's really the question. So according to Rabbi Yossi, he says, yeah, he has no problem with that, and therefore you don't have to pay him for his time because he can just volunteer. And even if they end up becoming his, because he makes some kind of a kinyan on them, well, we'll just give them to the Beis HaMikdash. So there's really nothing to be concerned about. Whereas according to the Chachamim, that's not going to work. If something belongs to you, right, to a private individual, so then he would be unable to donate it for communal offerings in the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, to make sure that it will never belong to the person who's guarding the wheat and barley, we pay him for his time, so that he's an employee of the Beis HaMikdash. And he can, as an employee, he can never own it himself. It will belong to the Beis HaMikdash, and we don't have to be concerned about the relationship between an individual and communal offerings. And so now, with that introduction, so says the Gemara, Ma'ra'a zman atze kohanim ve'om limonos. So there's a Gemara in Masechta Tainis where it's discussing these people who would donate wood to the Beis HaMikdash for use on the altar. That there were 10 of these families who they had a special day that they would donate wood to the Beis HaMikdash to be used for the korbanos. So it says, Maraz manatze kohanim ve'om limonos. How come we have these special days, these holidays for these families who would donate the wood? It's because when the Yidden came to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, from Galus, and there was no wood available in the office for the Mizbeach. So these families took it upon themselves to donate from their own private stashes wood to the lishka for the Beis for the to use on the Mizbeach. And korbanos tzibur, and they would bring the public offerings using the wood donated by these individuals. And the prophets among them made they said, that even if the office is filled up with wood, that there's plenty of wood to go around, and these families came to donate wood even though there was no real need for it, nonetheless, the korbanos should be offered from their wood, right? So you had these families that when the Beis HaMikdash needed wood, these families stood up and rose to the occasion and brought the wood. Therefore, there was like a special holiday for each one of these families every single year. And even if they didn't need the wood in the Beis HaMikdash, thank God there was plenty of wood in the Beis HaMikdash. Nonetheless, these people can still donate the wood, and the korbanos would be brought from their wood. So what do we see? So we see that private wood is being used for communal offerings. So Amar Reb Acha de Reb Yossi. So Reb Acha says that's Reb Yossi's opinion. De Reb Yossi Omer. Because as Reb Yossi said in the Mishnah, that you can volunteer to keep an eye on the wheat and the barley in the field so that there's grain for the Omer and the Shtei Alechem. But if you're just volunteering, what about what if it ends up becoming your possession? If you take it or whatever it is, you make some kind of a kinyan on it, it'll be yours. Then how can you use it in the Beis HaMikdash for communal offerings? So Reb Yossi doesn't have a problem with that. So it must be that also the thing with this wood, people donating the private wood to the Beis HaMikdash, must be Reb Yossi, who has no problem with private donations being used for communal korbanos. Reb Yossi b'shem Reb Ila, whereas Reb Yossi in the name of Reb Ila, an Amora Reb Yossi, Divrei HaKoli, he says that actually the donations of the wood everyone can agree with. Even the Chachamim who say that we must pay the watchman because we have to make sure that it doesn't become the property of a private individual. Nonetheless, they would say that when it comes to the wood donations, that would be acceptable, that we can use this wood for communal offerings. Because ma pligan, begufo shakorban. Where do Reb Yossi and the Chachamim argue? By the korban itself. In terms of this wheat or this barley, that it itself is the korban. The wheat is the Shtei Alechem, the barley is the Omer. Right, this barley and this wheat itself is what you're actually offering on the Beis HaMikdash. So when it comes to the korban itself, so the Chacham say, yeah, that korban cannot belong to an individual and be donated for the community. Aval, however, b'machshirei korban, but sort of meta korban things, such as the wood that's going to be used to, for fuel for the fire, which is then going to burn the korban, that already, kol ama modai sheim mishtane korban yachid korban tzibur. Everyone agrees that you can even use private, something from somebody's private stash can be donated for communal use if it is this kind of meta stuff. But if it's the korban itself, then the Chacham would say that it cannot come from an individual. Tani, and similarly we learn, Isha she'asasa ksones livna, the mother of the Kohen Gadol. If the mother of the Kohen Gadol makes a tunic for her son that he'll use while he's doing the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. So it's basically a private donation coming from an individual, from the Kohen Gadol's mother, and it's going to be used for communal offerings. So kshera, that's fine. As long as she makes it communal. Right? As long as she doesn't retain ownership of it, as long as she donates it to the community, her son, the Kohen Gadol, can use this tunic in his avodah. Amar Reb Acha de Reb Yossi. So Reb Acha says, okay, this must be Reb Yossi's opinion. Reb Yossi Omer afarotz misnadav shomechinam. As Reb Yossi said in our Mishnah, that a person can volunteer to guard the wheat and barley during the Shemitah year, and we're not concerned that if it becomes his, then it'll be a individual donating his own stuff to the Beis HaMikdash. So here also, the mother can donate this tunic to the communal good. Reb Yossi b'shem Reb Ila, whereas again Reb Yossi, the Amora, says in the name of Reb Ila, Divrei HaKoli, everyone can agree with the tunic. Mapligan, where do Reb Yossi, the Atana, and the Chachamim argue? Begufo shel korban, they only argue about the korban itself, about machshirei korban. But when it comes to meta korban stuff, such as in this case, the tunic that's going to be worn by the Kohen Gadol when he does avoda, kol ama modai shu mishtana korban yachid korban tzibur, everyone agrees that for the tunic, the Kohen Gadol's mother can make a tunic for him as long as she then donates it to the Beis HaMikdash, because it's not a korban itself, it's sort of meta stuff. Masnisim plige al Reb Yossi. Now, one second. We have a brisa that Take argues on Reb Yossi. Reb Yossi bar Reb Oven. Was that his name? B'shem Reb Ila. Rabbi Yossi b'Shem Rabbi Ila, who considers the wood to be meta, the wood to be not the korban itself, but to be sort of meta korban stuff, surrounding, secondary. Yeah, I don't know what else I could say. Hayom noagin. So also hayom noagin b'shas korban, b'shelo b'shas korban. We have a brayso that says that those days that were a yom tiv for these families. So according to the Tanakama, they would commemorate those days, whether right b'shas korban, whether there was a Beis Hamikdash and they were able to bring korbanos, whether it was shelo b'shas korban, whether there was no Beis Hamikdash standing and there was no korbanos to be brought. Nonetheless, these families would maintain that festival for themselves. Rabbi Yossi Omer Eino Noagin Ela b'shas korban bavad, says Rabbi Yossi the Tana that these festivals were only celebrated by these families when there was a Beis Hamikdash. But everyone seems to agree that as long as the Beis Hamikdash was standing, it was a yom tiv for these fellows. And therefore, if it was a yom tiv for these fellows because they brought wood, it must be that this wood was actually considered an actual korban. And because they were bringing this korban it's considered like they were bringing this korban of the wood, that's why it was a special yom tiv for them. But if it wasn't actually a korban, then what's so yom tiv about it? So it must be that bringing the wood itself is the korban itself. It's not just a meta thing. V'od minada, and also from the following. The Tanya is we learn by Amar Belazar Reb Tzaddik. It says Reb Belazar Reb Tzaddik. We taka saw this in Masechta Eruvin, I believe. We were from the family of Sanosh Binyamin. B'chal Tisha B'av Lios b'Shabbos, and the special yom tiv for the family of Sanosh and Binyamin was on the 10th of Av. And one year Tisha B'av fell out on Shabbos, and they pushed it off. V'dachinu also l'motzai Shabbos, so they pushed off Tisha B'av to Sunday. So Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzaddik says that their minig in their family was that they would fast on Tisha B'av when it was pushed off to Sunday, even though it was their Yom Tov, but they wouldn't finish it the entire day. So we see that because of this, meaning they wouldn't fast for the entire day. So they would fast part of the day because on the one hand it's being commemorated as Tisha B'av that day. On the other hand, it's their Yom Tov because of the wood donations. So we see that the wood donations is enough to so that people wouldn't fast for an entire Tisha B'av. It's pretty serious. So it must be that these wood donations were more than just wood donations. They must have actually been a korban itself, and the Gemara kind of leaves that unresolved. It seems to be like a Yerushalmi thing. Like it doesn't seem to have a problem with just like, smack in the middle of like a machlokas. You have the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Bar Ila, who says that these wood is like not the gufa shel korban. And then we say, what do you mean it has to be the gufa shel korban? Moving on. Just kind of drops it in the middle. Alright. Sounds good to me, I guess. Taman Taninon. We learned over there in the Mishnah called Korbanos HaYachid V'Atzibur Bayin Min Ha'aretz Min Chutz La'aretz. All korbanos, whether they're individual or communal, they can come from Eretz Yisrael or from Chutz La'aretz. Min HaChadosh Min HaYashan. They can come from the new grain. They can come from the old grain. Chutz Min HaOmer V'Shtei HaLechem. However, there's an exception. That is the Korban HaOmer, the flour offering, and the Shtei HaLechem, the two breads that they brought on Shavuos. Shein Bayin Ela Min HaChadosh Min HaAretz. That the Omer and the Shtei HaLechem must be brought from the new grain and must be brought from Eretz Yisrael. They cannot come from Chutz La'aretz. Rav Chuna b'shem Rabbi Yirmiyah, says Rav Chuna in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah to Rabbi Shmuel he. That is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. To Rabbi Shmuel Omer, says Rabbi Shmuel in Omer Ba Min Asuriya, that you cannot bring the Omer from Syria. Syria was a part that was I think it's like basically Syria. It was captured by David HaMelech. It wasn't necessary. It's a shaila if it was necessarily considered part of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Shmuel says that you're not allowed to bring the Omer from Syria because the Omer must be brought from Eretz Yisrael. So there you have it. That this brisa which says that the Omer and the Shtei HaLechem cannot be brought from outside of Eretz Yisrael. It must be Rabbi Shmuel. Taman Taninon. We learned over there Eser Kedush Josein. There are 10 different types of holinesses. Eretz Yisrael Mekudeshes Mikol Ha'aratzos. One of them is that Eretz Yisrael is holier than all of the other lands. Mai Kedushasa. What makes it so holy? Shemivim Mimena Omer V'Abikurim V'Shtei HaLechem. Because only from Eretz Yisrael do we bring the Korban HaOmer and the first fruits, and the shtei lechem on Shavuos, ma she'ein mevin kein mikol haratzos, which we do not bring from the other lands. Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yirmiyah to Rabbi Shmueli. And says Rabbi Chia in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah that is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, because Rabbi Shmuel says that the Omer Davka needs to be offered, or in this case also the Shtei Lechem, and the Bikurim were saying Davka has to be offered from Eretz Yisrael. Wow. Okay. The Rabbi Shmuel Omer says Rabbi Shmuel in a Omer ba min Asuria, that the Omer does not come from Syria, it needs to come from Eretz Yisrael. Talmud Tanina, we learned in the Mishnah over there. Rabbi Shmuel Omer says Rabbi Shmuel Macharish Rishus, Avkotzer Rishus. Okay. No, it says Bacharish Avkotzer Tishbos, that you have to rest from plowing and from harvesting. I believe that that's talking about Shemitah. And where are we? So macharish rishus, avkotzer rishus. So just like plowing is something that's volitional, so also harvesting is something that's volitional. Yotzak tzira omer shu mitzvah. To the exclusion of harvesting the korban omer, that harvesting the korban omer is a mitzvah, right? You have to bring the korban omer, and therefore it could be doche Shabbos. But I think that we're also assuming that it could also be doche Shemitah, which is how it's going to kind of tie in to our Mishnah, which talks about guarding the grain on Shemitah. Rabbi Shmuel Kedaitin, Rabbi Shmuel is like his opinion. Rabbi Shmuel the Omar. The Rabbi Shmuel says, "Eina Omer but min Asuria," that the Omer does not come from Syria. Kedaitin the Omar Yotzak Tzir Omer Shu Mitzvah, which is like which is like that we're saying that the Omer is doche Shemitah, right? Meaning that Rabbi Shmuel holds that the Omer Davka needs to come from Eretz Yisrael. And what do you do on Shemitah? So also the Omer is doche Shemitah, right? Machar Rishus, Avkotzer Rishus, to the exception of Tzira Omer, harvesting the Omer, that could be doche Shvius, and that is how he could say that the Omer Davka has to come from Eretz Yisrael. Mantana shomer svichis b'shvius notlin tzcharim m'chumas halishka. Who is the Tana who says that those who guard these aftergrowths on shvius are able to take their wage from the chumas alishka? Rabbi Shmuel. It must be Rabbi Shmuel, because Rabbi Shmuel says that Ktsira Omer is doche even Shemitah. So Omer Rabbi Yosef Divrei Akoli. So says Rabbi Yosef that no, everybody could actually agree with that, because even if you say that the Omer can come from outside of Eretz Yisrael, from Syria, lo matzu b'Syria, mivin osan misfichin sheberetz Yisrael, because if they didn't find any grain in Syria for the Omer, so then they could bring it from Eretz Yisrael. So you still do need to have some of this grain available and being guarded in the event that they need to bring it from Eretz Yisrael. Hahen Omer Mao Sheyizra B'Tchila. Okay, fine. So, question: if you can guard the grain for the Omer, so that you can harvest it if you need to, can you also plant the Omer? Can you actually plant grain? Can you plant barley and wheat on Shemitah so that you have it for the Omer? So Reb Chia bar Ada bai kumi Reb Mana. So Reb Chia bar Abba asked to Reb Mana, Lo nimtza kikometz al shirayim she'ein nechalin. So he said, well, shouldn't this be like, for example, if you have, the way that a korban mincha works, you have all the flour, right? You have a whole bunch of flour, and then the Kohen takes basically like a fistful, and he puts that on the mizbeach, and then he can eat the rest of it. Now, what happens in a situation where for whatever reason, you're not allowed to eat the flour? So do you still take the kometz and put it on the mizbeach? The answer is no, you don't. And therefore, if we have a situation where you planted, wheat and barley so you can have it for the Omer and the Shtei Lechem, how could that work? Because you won't be able to eat this wheat and barley because you're not allowed to plant during Shvius, so you're not going to be allowed to eat it. So what makes you think that you could take the korban, right, that you'd be allowed to bring a korban from it? So, Amrle, so Rav Ada responds, so Rav Mana responds, Naisek chamisha dvarim shein baim betuma ve'nechalim betuma. So Rav Mana answers, no, theoretically I can answer to you that if you plant the seeds, even though you won't be able to eat the Omer and Shtei Alechem, it could be like there are 5 korbanos that are able to be brought in Tumah, even though they are not able to be eaten in Tumah. One of them is the Korban Omer. So we could say that just like it could be brought by Tumah, even though it's not eaten by Tumah, so you could theoretically argue that you could plant the seeds for the Korban Omer, even though you won't be able to eat the barley or the wheat, but maybe you could still use it for the Korban. Okay. Ketzad hu ose. Now, when we say that we pay the people who are guarding the Omer and Shtei Alechem, we pay them from the Trumas Halishka, how does that work? Do we just take money from, this donated Machzas HaShekel that people donated and is now hektish and it's sitting in the Beis HaMikdash in these boxes? Do we just take some of the money and we just go over to these guards and pay them and now they can buy pizza with it? So the answer is Notamos min hashulchani. What you do is you actually have a money changer pay these guards. So the money that the guards are getting are just regular money from a money changer. And that's before the Omer is offered. Now, and then what you do is, when it comes time to bring the Korban Omer, you then take the money from the Lishka, which is hektish, right? It's the Machzas HaShekel money. And then you're mechalel the money of this Machzas HaShekel onto this Omer, onto this Korban that you're now bringing. And then you transfer their value onto this Omer. And then the deconsecrated money you give to the money changer to pay him back for the funds that he paid to the guard. V'tavuskein, is this really going to work? How could that work? Because what happens is these guards are going to be guarding a whole bunch of flour, a whole bunch of barley and wheat, but then this barley and wheat has to get processed in order to be brought as an Omer or Shtei Alechem. And in that process, a lot of it is gonna, you're gonna be grinding it and winnowing it and who knows, all sorts of stuff, and there's gonna be plenty of it that ends up going away, and you end up in the end with much less than you started with. So the money changer is going to be giving funds to the guards for the total amount, yet when we take the money from the Machzas HaShekel and end up transferring its Kedusha, being Mechal, its value onto the Omer and the Shtei Alechem, at that point it's already much less. So you're not really going to be able to transfer the full amount to the money changer. Or at least, we're not going to have like sort of a clear equation of how you could just transfer the full funds to the money changer based on this Omer and Shtei Alechem, because you're going to end up with, at the current moment, at the time of the Chilul, there's already much less product. So Vacha b'shem Rabbah, Kol ma she'iten ein damav mishah rishona, says Vacha in the name of Rabbah, that no, all they're getting paid for lemaisa is whatever is available at the end. Tana, we learned something similar regarding the stone workers in the Beis HaMikdash. They would also do the same with the stone workers. How do you pay them for their work? So you take money from the money changer and give it to the quarriers and the cutters before, right? And you pay them before the stones are put onto the walls. Maybe most and then once the stones have been sort of put in place, they would take money from the lishka and be mechal the money onto the stones, and then that money, once it's been mechal onto the stones, can go to the money changer. So now the Gemara asks the same kasha, but Tavuskein, does this really work? Because while they're processing the stones, parts of it gets cut away. Maybe some of the stones aren't good. They throw them away. So ultimately, these workers are going to be paid for all their work. Yet the actual end result, which is what the Machzas HaShekel coins are being mechal onto, is going to be less. So you're not going to end up with the full amount that was transferred to the workers from the money changer. So Rabbi Yossi bei Rabun b'shem Shmuel kol ma she'yitein ein domeh mishah rishona. The the same answer, which is no. The only money that they are being given is the current amount, which is basically that's what they're being paid from the beginning. All right, new Mishnah. Para v'sar amishtalech v'lashon shel zaharis bain mitrumas halishka. All right. So the para aduma, the red heifer that if you have somebody who's tamei mace, so you use the ashes from the para aduma. So purchasing the para aduma, v'sar amishtalech, and the goat that would be dropped off of a cliff on Yom Kippur. V'lashon shel zaharis, and also when they would burn the para aduma, so into the fire they would throw some crimson wool, some red wool. They would throw in together with some cedar and some hyssop. That's what they would do. So purchasing this red wool, bain mitrumas halishka. So the funds for the para aduma, the sar mishtalech, and this red wool that they would burn with the para aduma, so that was paid for by the trumas halishka, by the machzus shekel. Kevesh para, interestingly, so yeah, very interestingly. So there were all sorts of precautions that they made in preparation of the para aduma because it had to remain tahor. I think maybe it's a Gemara in Sukkah or something. There's a Gemara somewhere. I think it might be in Sukkah that describes they were like these kids, I think, that they would like raise in complete purity. I can't remember, but somehow it had to do with like the para aduma. Maybe like the people who ultimately slaughtered the para aduma were like made sure to have never have gotten in tamei like their whole life or something like that. I can't remember, but anyways, so included in the precautions that they would make and the efforts that they would make to ensure that the para remains pure is that there was a ramp that was constructed from the Beis Hamikdash to where they would do the Sreifas HaPara, and they constructed the ramp in such a way that it was like above the ground. So even if there happened to be like an unknown grave buried, there would be a tefach of space. Like there were all sorts of precautions that they made in creating this ramp so that there would be no possibility of there being any tumah along the way. So the kevesh sara mishtalech. Interestingly, there was also some kind of ramp they would make for the kohen who was taking out the sar amishtalech, or the messenger who was taking out the sar amishtalech on Yom Kippur to drop off the cliff. So apparently the Babylonians were like pretty fastidious, and they would like just want the messenger to get on with it because they wanted their sins to go away. So that to prevent harassing the messenger, there was some kind of ramp that would protect him from harassment. All right. Veloshin Shabin Karnov, and also so the goat that got dropped off the cliff, so it had also some red wool that was between its horns. Okay. V'amas hamayim, as well as the upkeep of the stream of water that ran through the Hazara, as we learned about in Perek Tamid Nishchat and Masechet Pesachim. V'chomos ha'ir u'migdalosea, as well as the upkeep of the walls of Jerusalem and its towers. V'chotzorkei ha'ir, and all the needs of the city, but in Mishari Lishka, come from the remainders of the Lishka. Whatever remained in the office, in the temperature, in the temple, after the Machzis shekel coins were put in their respective boxes, whatever was left over, so those funds were used to pay for these things. Abba Shaul Omer, says Abba Shaul, Kevesh para kohanim gedolim osin mishel atzman. Says Abba Shaul that this ramp that the kohanim gedol that they would use to transport the para aduma to where they were going to burn it, so actually the kohanim gedolim paid for that with their own funds. It didn't come from the Shiari Lishka. Interesting. Most of Shiari Lishka. So I don't know if that means that it had. No, I don't. So I'm not sure that means that it had to have come from the Kohen Gadol's own funds. I think what it means is that the Lemaise, the Kohanim Gedolim, always sort of invested their own funds in this ramp, possibly because they were often the ones who were gonna. I don't know if they had to be the ones. Maybe they had to be the ones that, or the Skana Kohanim, I think, but maybe they also often went as well to do this Sreifas Para Aduma, and therefore, for whatever reason, they would invest in this ramp. Mosar Shari lishka ma hayu osin bain. Now, what about the leftovers of the shari lishka? What happens if you had these coins? So you had coins in this office. They took the coins, they put it in some boxes. They were leftover coins. Now, the leftover coins, we just said what you could do with them. Build all sorts of things. What happens if you built whatever you had to build and there were still leftover coins? So, interesting. So Rabbi Shmuel says what you could do now with this leftover money is you could essentially invest it in sorts. What they would do is they would take this money and they would buy wine, oil, flour, things that individuals who come to bring a korban in the Beis Hamikdash would need for their korban, so the temple, what they would do is they would take this money, they would buy up a whole bunch of wine, oil, flour, wholesale, and then sell it retail to people who came to bring korbanos, and they would make a profit. Rabbi Akiva, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva, we don't do this. We don't take hektish money like these leftover coins and then go and use them for business goals. Aflo mishalanim, and similarly, not with money designated for aniyim. So if you have money set aside for the poor, don't invest it and try to make more money. Just leave it and keep it liquid, and then you'll have it if you need when you need it for the poor people. Moser truma mahayu osin ba. What would you do with the leftover truma? Right? Meaning truma salishka. Meaning they would go to the office, take out a whole bunch of money, put them in these boxes. What if there was leftover money in the boxes? What do you do with those? Rikue zav tzipula beis kodesh hakodashim. The answer is they would use this money to fund the gold plates that would be used on the floors and the walls of the Beis Kodesh HaKodashim. Very, very interesting. Wow. Rabbi Shmuel says, Rabbi Shmuel, Mosa Aperis, Ketzim Mizbeach, Mosa Truma Lechlei Shari. Says Rabbi Shmuel, the leftovers of the fruits are for the Ketzim Mizbeach. What are these fruits? So it could be that it's a reference to the fruits that Rabbi Shmuel was talking about a few lines earlier, which is that if there was the leftover shirayim, so then they would buy fruits wholesale and sell them retail, so that profit that they would make would go towards Ketz HaMizbeach, right? That we've talked about, these animals that were purchased to make sure that there was always sacrifices at all times on the Mizbeach. Moser Truma Lechlei Sharis, and the leftover Truma Salishka goes to the Klei Sharis, that the vessels used in the temple. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva Moser Truma Leketz Mizbeach, the leftover money from the Truma Salishka goes towards purchasing these offerings, the dessert offerings of the Mizbeach, the offerings that are offered when there's nothing else to offer. Moser Nesachim Lechlei Sharis, the leftover Nesachim goes to the Klei Sharis, and there's different options of what the leftover Nesachim could be. One option is that basically the Beis Hamikdash would purchase all of their flour for offerings for an entire year. So they would make a deal with a supplier, and they would purchase for an entire year, and they would negotiate. They would negotiate a deal. Part of this deal is that basically if the price went, if the price went up, they would be able to maintain the same price, and if it went down, then they would get the lower price. Somehow they would negotiate a deal like that. So now, what happens if at the time that they negotiated the deal, so you can get 4 sa'ah for a selah, and then the price of wheat or flour went up, and now you only get 3 sa'ah for a selah, but they still get that initial price of 4 sa'ah for a selah, so they get extra flour. So that could be, right, the leftover minchas nesachim. The other option is that they would overfill the utensil with flour, and then so the part that's above the brim, that could be the leftover nesachim. could also be talking about wine libations. Okay, so whichever one it is. So the Moser Nesachim. So these leftovers. So what are they? What can you do with them? So the Chlei Sharis, you can take their value and invest it towards purchasing vessels for the Beis Hamikdash. Reb Chanani Skana Kohanim, who remembers Reb Chanani Skana Kohanim? So apparently he's the same person as we saw at the end of the first parak of Psachim, Tum and Tyre, Reb Chanani Skana Kohanim. Well, he says, Moser Nesachim Keitz HaMizbeach, that these leftover Nesachim are used for buying the korbanos for the Keitz HaMizbeach offerings. Moser HaTrumeh, the Klei Sharis, and the leftover Truma Salishka goes to purchasing utensils for the Beis Hamikdash. However, the common denominator between Rebbe Akiva and Reb Chananya Skana Kohanim is that they disagree with Rabbi Shmuel regarding the fruits. They both agree that you may not take the funds from the temple and sort of buy low and sell high. Okay. Kevesh para chule. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Rabbi Yonasan says Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman named Rabbi Yonasan Kimelashonis hein. There are 3 red wools in sort of halacha or in the Torah. Shel sarir b'sela, shel mitzor b'shekel, shel para b'shtei slav. So the red wool that they would put between the horns of the goat that got dropped off the cliff. So the value, interesting, somebody's driving by in their automobile at 5 a.m. with some loud music. Alright, enjoy. Chaparayim before Sfiras HaOmer. Alright. Hakoponim. So, sorry B'Sela, Shamatzora B'Shekel. Sorry B'Sela. So, the red wool of the goat was worth a sela. Shamatzora B'Shekel. The red wool for a mitzorah that they would use when they would like sprinkle blood on the mitzorah who's being purified. So they would take some of the blood from his birds and sprinkle it on him. Alright. And to do that, they would use like red wool and hyssop and cedar, and they would like dip it in the blood and sprinkle it on the guy. Okay. So that red wool was worth like a shekel, which is half a sela. Shalpara b'shtei slaim, and the wool that they would put on the that they would use for the para aduma, that was 2 selas, and that they would like throw in the fire with cedar wood and what was the other thing? Hyssop. Okay, got it. Good. Weiter. So Reb Chunya Devras Chavrin, Rebba Bar Zavda b'shem Reb Shimon ben Chalafta Shalpara b'shtei slaim v'mechza. Okay, apparently the para aduma red wool was worth 2.5 selas. Ve'ein demafkin, vis demafkin, lishna bazars. Bazars is those who say it was taka 10 zuz, which is the same thing as 2.5 selas anyways. Alright. Rabbi Yehuda b'shem Rabbi Shmuel Talmidei Chacham v'melamdin es hakayanim hilchos shchita, hilchos kabbalah, hilchos zrika, noten tzchaim b'tshuma salishka. Very interesting. Says Rabbi Yehuda, says some of this Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. So he says that the Talmidei Chacham who would teach the Kohanim the halachas of shchita, the halachas of kabbalah sadam, zrika sadam. Very interesting. There was like, I guess a sort of training that the Kohanim went through. How do you do shchita? How do you do kabbalah sadam? How do you do zrika sadam? So the teachers, how did they get paid? They get paid from, so it says here from the Truma Salishka, it means the Shiarei Truma Salishka. That the leftovers from whatever didn't get put into the boxes, so that would be used to pay these teachers. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Redifa b'shem Rav Imi mi Bikri. No. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Redifa b'shem Rav Imi mevakri mume kodshim noten tzchaim Truma Salishka. Very interesting. The people who would check the animals that would be offered as korbanos to see if they have a mum. Very interesting. So there was like sort of, you wouldn't just show up at the Beis HaMikdash and bring your animal and put it directly on the Mizbeach. You have to check for bugs. Meaning bugs as in flaws, like computer software. So Lemaisa, I just submitted a mobile application to the App Store and there's a vetting process. They have to review it first. So the Maisa also, they over here, the korbanis, there's inspectors, make sure there's no mums. So those inspectors would be paid mitrumas halishka from the trumas, from the leftovers of the trumas halishka. Weiter, Reb Acha bar Reb Tanchum bar Chia b'shem Simloi Magiei Sefer HaHazara Notlin Schar mitrumas halishka. Those who would check the Sefer Torahs that were in the Sefer Torah that was in the Hazara, they would also be paid from the Shiarei Trumas Halishka. Yeah, there's different opinions apparently about what the Sefer Hazara is, but it seems that there was like a particular Sefer Torah that was very accurate, and that was in the Sefer Torah, and that was in the Hazara, and the one who would check that Sefer Torah, he would be paid from the funds of the Shiarei Halishka. Gidol bar Binyamin b'shem Reb Asi shnedayon gzelos noten schar mitrumas halishka. Okay, the two judges of thefts would be paid from the Shiarei Trumas Halishka. Yeah, apparently there were like two judges in Jerusalem who would like judge theft cases. Now I don't remember from Masechta Sanhedrin if why would there be two judges judging? Gosh, I don't. Was there an opinion over there that maybe all you need is two judges for monetary cases? I can't remember. Also, they throw around the concept of like a yachid mumche. If you have like a judge who's an expert, maybe he can judge by himself. So maybe there were like two judges judging by themselves. I don't know. Like, why would there only be two judges? Usually you need three. I don't know. Shmuel Amar Nashim ha'orges b'paroches notlan schar mitrumas halishka. Says Shmuel that the women who would weave the paroches, so they would get paid for the trumas halishka. That in the first temple, so there was a wall between the Kodesh HaKodashim and the rest of the Heichal. Now, in the second Beis HaMikdash, apparently the structure was much taller, and therefore they had to come up with a creative solution because they were unable to build a sturdy wall at just one tefach thick and have it go from the floor to the ceiling, and yet they also, having a wall thicker than one tefach was not an option because there are specific dimensions that you have to stick to halachically. So their solution was to, instead of use a proper wall, they would use curtains. And they had these two curtains that were separated by a tefach. And so the women who wove those curtains would be paid from the Shiarei Trumas Halishka, according to Shmuel. Reb Chuna Amar, however, Rav Chuna argues and he says mitrumas bedek habayis, they were paid by the donations of the bedek habayis, the temple treasury. Mapolig Shmuel, Mapolig. So what's the machlokas? How come Shmuel says they're paid from the Shiarei Trumas Halishka and Rav Chuna says that they're paid from the temple treasury? So Shmuel avedla kekorban, Rav Chuna avedla kebinyan. Well, Shmuel treats these curtains and the process of creating them, Shmuel treats it like a korban, and therefore it was paid from the Shiarei Halishka. Although if it was a korban, then mistama would be paid from the Trumas Halishka itself. I don't know. And Rav Chuna says that it is like the construction. And the construction of the temple would be paid for by the treasury. Amr B'chizkiya Tana Rabbi Yehuda God Gedos. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda God Gedos taught Aktoris v'chol korbanos hatzibor. The incense and all of the public offerings by mitrumas halishka would be paid for by the donations of the machzis hashekel. Mizbach hazav v'chol klei sharis. The paying for the golden mizbeach. Okay, chol klei sharis, and any vessels that are required in the Beis Hamikdash by mimosa nisachim, they come from these leftover nisachim that we discussed earlier, the leftover libations from like the flour and the wine. Mizbach ha'ola v'ha'heichal, the altar that they would put the ola, the korban ola on, v'ha'heichal, the outer mizbeach, mizbach ha'ola. Okay, there's the mizbach ha'katoris, the golden mizbeach, which was in the heichal. and then there was the Mizbach HaOla, which was outside in the Ezras Kohanim. The Heichal ve'Azaris, and the Heichal and the Azaris, but Mishiari Alishkos, that would be paid for by the remainders of the office, that which didn't make it into the boxes from the Machzas Shekel. Chutz la'Azaris, the things outside of the Azara, but Milishkas Bedek Habayis, come from the treasury. So things like the city walls and or the temple walls and the what did we say, the what was it, the walls and the towers or whatever. Okay, where are we? Fine. So that comes from the temple treasury. But one second, it says that the stones of the Mizbeach, as well as the Heichal and all of the Azaris, Ma'alin Boin, there's a din Me'ila. But is there Me'ila by these leftover funds? Right? We're saying that if we can use these leftover funds in order to build these Mizbach HaOla, the Heichal, Azaris, then some of them they wouldn't be shaykh to Me'ila, because these leftover funds, there's no Me'ila by these leftover funds. So like Reb Meir, well, you could say that it's like Reb Meir, because we learned the other day that according to Reb Meir, you can actually use the leftover funds that are still in the office to buy korbanos if you run out of money in the boxes. So you can come back into the office and use the money that's there to buy korbanos, and therefore says Reb Meir that you actually, if you get your own benefit, if you use that money for pizza, so then it's Me'ila, and therefore according to Reb Meir, since it's Me'ila, so then since you use these funds to fund these projects, so then that's how you can explain that if you get benefit from like the stones of the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, then there will be Me'ila. Amr B'chia says Reb Chia Klum Amr Reb Meir Ella B'soch Shnaso B'acha Chutz L'Shnaso Anu Kaimen. But says Reb Chia, you can't really say that it's Reb Meir, because Reb Meir is talking about specifically within the year that the shekels were donated, because they'll be used to buy the korbanos that year. Here we're talking about these walls and these stones that are going to be there for more than a year. So even Reb Meir wouldn't necessarily say that you're going to be chayav wouldn't necessarily say that the funds that were used to fund these walls would be shaykh to Me'ila after the year. Alright. Fine. Where are we? Amr Reb Meir Elab Soch Shnaso V'acha Chutz L'Shnaso Anun Kaimen. Amr Reb Chizkiah says Reb Chizkiah Tan Reb Yehuda Godgonios HaShulchan V'Amenor V'Amizbachos V'Aprochos Ma'akvim V'Sok Korbanos. Okay, the Shulchan is where they put the 12 loaves every single week. V'Amenorah V'Amizbachos, and the different altars, V'Aprochos, and the curtain between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim Ma'akvim V'Sok Korbanos. If any of them are sort of in a invalid state, if they need to be fixed or whatever it is, so then you cannot bring any other korbanos until they get fixed. Okay? Divrei Reb Meir, that is Reb Meir's opinion. Whereas the Chacham say, Ein l'cha ma'akev es hakorban ela karkov v'keren. Says the Chacham, look, the only thing that's going to hold up the korbanos is basically the Mizbeach itself, but not the Shulchan or the Menorah. Like, if there's a problem with that, so fix it, but you can still bring other korbanos. V'lokein Amar Elazar Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina Treon Amarin. But one second, both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina say, Kol hein dichsev nochach ma'akev tzela enu ma'akev, that any of the vessels that it says in their context nochach in front of, or it says tzela on the side of, enu ma'akev. And so if it says nochach, then it is ma'akev, so you can't bring any other korbanos if that vessel about which it says in the Torah nochach, if there's an issue with that vessel, so then you can't bring any other korbanos. Tzela enu ma'akev. But if it says side, tzela, so then if there's an issue with that vessel about which it says tzela in the Torah, so then you could still bring the korbanos. V'amar Reb Shmuel bar Nachman, it says Reb Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Reb Yonasan v'afilu tzela ma'akev. Even if it says tzela side, that's also going to be ma'akev. V'amar Reb Ila, it says Reb Ila b'shem Reb Shmuel bar Nachman v'afilu sima ma'akev. Okay, even vessels about which it says sima, placing, that would also be ma'akev. You wouldn't be able to bring any korbanos if those klei sharis there's an issue with. No, so the kasha is, how can we have a brayso that says that the menorah, mizbechos, parochos, makvim, so korbanos, and the chacham say that it's only the Mizbeach, and yet we have these Amoraim saying it has nothing to do with that, it has to do with, if it's a Tzela or Nochach or Sima. So how can you have the Amoraim having, a different opinion than the Tanoim? So the Gemara answers, Amr B'Chanina, Kan b'avoda shebifnim, kan b'avoda shebechutz. It depends. The Amoraim are talking about the avodas shebifnim, the internal avodas, the things that were done in the Heichal, whereas the Machlokas between Reb Meir and the Chachamim is talking about the avodas that are done outside, the avodas shebechutz. Okay? Outside of the Heichal. Fine. Amr B'Chanina says, B'Chanina, Shachtzis gedola ha'isa b'vnei kohanim gedolim, sheyosem mishishim kikrei zav ha'imutziyin ba. Interesting. So, says Reb Chanina that so our Mishnah had said that the Kohanim Gedolim would expend their own money in order to build these ramps that they would use for the Para Aduma to take it out to where they were going to burn it. And apparently it was like a whole big thing. Every Kohen Gadol would have to, that was like their thing. They would have to, it was almost like keeping up with the Joneses. Every Kohen Gadol would have to mark his territory, and it was like a thing to build this ramp. I don't know why, but every Kohen Gadol would rebuild this ramp, and it was like some kind of honor thing. Like, look at me, look at this ramp that I built. So Reb Chanina shachtzes gedola aisu b'vnei kohanim gedolim. So says Reb Chanina that it was like a big pompous thing that the kohanim gedolim would they had to build their ramp. When it would be their turn, they would rebuild this ramp in their way. That it would cost more than 60 gold, kikars. Gold, what's a kikar? Kikar is like a bar of gold, I guess, in order to build this ramp. Apparently it was a big expenditure. Omed because it's not like the ramp was broken each time. No, it was standing, it was completely functional, and yet they would have to, nobody would use the ramp of their predecessor. He would dismantle it and build it himself. Hasav Rabula Asakasha, Kumi Rabmana to Rabmana. Vatani Shimon Atzadik Shtei Paros also Lo Bekevish Otzi Ezo. But one second, Ula Asakasha, he says 1 second. Shimon Atzadik, one time he had to bring 2 paradumas, and each time he built a separate ramp. Now, he didn't have to outdo himself. Meaning the fact that Shimon HaTzadik brought out 2 paradumas and each time he used a separate ramp implies that it's not about outdoing your predecessor, because it was him both times. So rather, it must be Islach Lemeimar Shimon HaTzadik Shacha Tzoya. So what was Shimon? It can't be that he was trying to outdo himself. So my kedon. So what is it? Al Shem Maila Haya B'Para Silsul. No, rather it was a way to give kavod and honor to the mitzvah of para aduma. Is that it wasn't about outdoing your friend. It was about showing how beloved the mitzvah is, that you wanted to rebuild the ramp from scratch every single time that you wanted to do this para aduma and give it respect. Tani, it was taught zizin uchsalim ayu yotzin mikan that they were beams and walls on the sides of the ramp, so that the kohanim, when they were going to burn the paraduma, they shouldn't overlook, if they would want to look at something, and they might extend their head outside of the ramp, and then who knows, maybe there'll be a mace there and they'll become tameh, tumas oil, and it'll be a problem. So therefore they had walls and beams sticking out so that they couldn't see except in front of them, and that way we would be sure that they would remain tahor. Okay, well that was Daf Yud of Masechta Sheqalim. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Peace.